Hello, one and all, and welcome to a very special episode of the Book Off podcast, recorded for Raworth's Harrogate Literature Festival. Wherever you are and whatever you're doing, I hope you're staying safe and well. I'm your host, Joe Haddow, and for anyone who hasn't heard the podcast before, allow me to explain a little about our format. Well, in each episode, I'm joined by two fabulous authors who talk about their writing, their latest books, what they've been reading recently, before we turn to the book off. This is where each of my guests gets 3 minutes uninterrupted to pitch to us a book that they absolutely love and they think that everyone should read. They don't have to use all their 3 minutes, but most do. And when they reach the end of their time, I cut them off using either the horn, needs a bit of waking up, or the school bell, which doesn't need any waking up. We're currently into our 6th series, I know. So if this is your first taste of the Book Off podcast and you like what you hear, then please do go and check out our backlist. All our episodes are available to listen to on iTunes, Spotify, Acast, or wherever you choose to listen to your podcast. Just search Book Off in Google and it will come up, but make sure you spell it right. Before I introduce you to today's guests, a quick note on the festival's sponsor, Raworth's LLP Solicitors. You know Raworth's. They've sponsored Harrogate Literature Festival since it began in 2012 and continue to do so this year. And in these strange old times, everyone is, of course, very grateful for their support. So as always, I'm joined, as I said, by two brilliant authors who'll be going head to head in a war of the words a little later on. My first guest is a writer and journalist whose memoir, The Last Act of Love, was a Sunday Times bestseller and shortlisted for the Wellcome Prize, no less. She joins us from, I was going to say Cornwall, but actually I think she's in a hotel room somewhere exotic. She's here to tell us about her latest book, Dear Reader. Cathy Rentzenbrink, welcome to you. Hello.
Hello, it's very nice to be with you.
It's lovely to be with you as well through the power of technology. And I'm also joined by a former business journalist turned author and primary school teacher. She won the Costa Short Story Award back in 2017, which I judged. And her first novel, Nightingale Point, was longlisted for the Women's Prize. Here to talk about her new novel, Homecoming, it's Luan Goldie. Welcome to you.
Hiya, nice to see you.
Lovely to see you both. So Cathy, you're sort of on the road, aren't you, at the moment?
Well, I'm in Cheltenham at the moment. It is the first time I've left my home since March. Well, I think it's the furthest I've been until now was about 16 miles. I did go to a studio to record the audiobook of my book, which is about 16 miles away. So yeah, I've got that feeling of the bends. I'd completely forgotten how to get dressed as well, because I do a secret. If I am at home, even though I do quite a lot by Zoom, I've always got my pajama bottoms on underneath. So, but of course, moving out into the world, you can't wear your pajamas, sadly. So I've had to reinvestigate proper clothes. Dressing like a grown up, which is very odd. But nice to be here.
I'm the same, because usually we record this podcast, or have been certainly over the last few months, remotely, with no visuals, because it's audio only usually. And of course, when Harrogate asked us to do this, I thought, yeah, absolutely, love it. And then I remembered, you've got to get dressed. You're going to be on camera.
I got an email from my wonderful publicist, Camilla, earlier on saying, just checking you're okay for the podcast. And do remember, it's going to be video too. And I emailed back saying, thank you for saving me from doing it in bed covered in biscuit crumbs.
which we all know we would be doing, if it was video. We know that. And Luanne, you've moved into your husband's room there just to, get away from noise in the house. But I was asking you about this artwork behind you, and you're like, I don't know, nothing to do with me, mate.
Yeah, I'm afraid I have no clue who it's by. Very nice backdrop.
Just a lovely backdrop.
Yeah.
For doing this. And for anyone listening to the podcast and not watching, there's a very bright coloured, lovely canvas behind Luanne at the moment. Do you two know each other? Have you met before, or is this the first time?
No. It's very nice. I mean, one of the lovely things I think about, and actually that I miss about not doing book events, is I really like the way that you meet other writers in, festival rooms. So it's extremely nice to meet you, Luanne.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, that is strange. I feel like I've missed out on all the festivals because I'm such a new writer, and then this summer just that kind of didn't happen was where I was booked for festivals, and then they all got cancelled. So I feel like I still don't know anyone.
Oh.
And yeah, you'll have to carry on writing novels so you can
Yeah.
experience
Oh, no.
it in the future.
There's always the paperback. There's always the paperback. We'll get you
Yeah.
for some festivals then. Well, this is like a very sort of poor green room that I'm offering here, and I'm afraid there's no snacks or slightly off wine, but maybe you've got your own thing going on. So over the next sort of 40 minutes or so, I want to talk about both your writing processes, what you've been reading recently, and of course find out about the books you're putting up for the book off a little later on. First, if we can talk about your new books though. Cathy, you mentioned Dear Reader, you did the audio book for it recently. And those that know you know that you are a huge reader and have been since you were young. And I think the quote from this book actually is rarely seen without her nose in a book as a child. So tell us, for those that don't know yet, about Dear Reader, who it's for and what made you want to write it.
Well, I was thinking actually about identity and all the ways we describe ourselves, and that some of those things used to be true and are no longer true. So one of the things I think about too much, probably more than I should, is, I was a sister and then my brother died and I'm not a sister anymore, and that makes me sad. Other slightly more positive things, I used to be a smoker and I'm no longer a smoker. I'm not a drinker anymore either. And I was just thinking about the way but I've always struggled actually with saying I'm a writer. Every time I say I'm a writer, it feels like I'm telling a lie. So there's all that. But the truest thing I feel I could ever say about myself is that I'm a reader. And that's really the only thing I can say about myself that doesn't cause some sort of internal wobble. Everything else about my identity either feels a bit fraudulent or it's something I don't necessarily want. But the thing that I hold on to is I am a reader. And when I say I am a reader, I just feel so sort of healthy and right in my body and in my soul and in my mind. So I was thinking about that. I was also, I was stuck writing a novel, and that was miserable. And I felt really nostalgic for my time as a bookseller. And the thing with bookselling is, it is really hard work. But now that I haven't done it for a few years, I've just got complete rose-tinted spectacles. I've forgotten that it was hard work. I just remember it as the complete time of my life where all my customers were joyous, exciting, respectful, delightful individuals with whom I had these amazing conversations, which is true. And I've forgotten that actually quite a lot of my life was either being shouted at by people, and then when I became slightly more important in the bookshop hierarchy, having to go into the shop on my days off because the cashier had fallen down the stairs. So it's like, but I've forgotten all that, and I just felt very nostalgic for it. And also I'd realised I was spending too much time watching and reading the news, and watching and reading people on social media respond to the news, and that was making me sick in my body and in my soul. So I prescribed myself a course of rereading, and that's how the book came about, really. And it's people who think I'm a fast writer, which I'm not. I'm a very slow writer. I have been muddling about with this now for a few years, but people do me the compliment to say that it reads easily, which I always hope is the case. But people keep saying to me things like, oh, you've done well, like, bashing that out in time for lockdown. I do feel, sadly, it does work very well for these times, but that's a complete sort of coincidence. It just happened that was where my head was at, and so it's turned out to be fortuitous timing for it.
Yeah, I was going to say it is such a book for lockdown, isn't it? And I do want to pick up on the social media thing, maybe in a bit, because I've been thinking about this a lot. I've got no time for social media. I'm very bad at it, and I also don't like it very much. And it occurred to me recently that the time that one spends scrolling or working out the best phrase to fit to 140 characters or whatever, you think how many chapters of a book you could have read in that time.
Yeah.
Thank God, what am I doing? But we'll come back to that. One thing in your book, Cathy, is that you go back to when you were young and the books that you were reading as a child, and you talk about a teacher, Mrs. C, I think it is, and you talk about like reading in schools. And Luanne, I wanted to bring you in here because you are a primary school teacher as well as an author, and I just wanted your take on how sort of important it is to get children reading at a young age, and how you encourage that in school?
Oh, it's everything for me, because I'm specifically Key Stage 1, so the children are 5, 6, 7 years old. If they crack the reading and get really enthusiastic about the reading, it feels like everything else will fall into place. Then they can access the maths and the science and even the arts, everything. So I say to the parents, just get them reading anything they want. I was with the year 4 children the other day, and they're looking at the Twits, Roald Dahl.
Oh,
And they love it, right? But I did ask, I was like, you guys read this in year 2 and you're reading it again in year 4, and we're talking about Roald Dahl and their favorite Roald Dahl books. And there were a couple of kids that were really quiet. And I said, is there anyone in here who doesn't enjoy the Roald Dahl books? And there were a few hands. Like, I said, well, it's fine. You can, read something else. And then I realized there's quite a few kids who don't like the Harry Potter books, but it's like a big scandal if they say that. You can read whatever you want. There's some kids who only read like recipe books or, like just as long as it's reading, right? I mean, I really like books and stories. Growing up, I like stories, but if I didn't, I hope my mum would have encouraged me to just read the back of the cereal box. It's all reading, it's all a value to me as a teacher. That's what I think anyway.
Yeah. Oh, it's good to hear that, some of the classics like Roald Dahl are still in
they
school.
love them, yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Cathy, you mentioned Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, of course, which is probably most people watching, listening, thinking, oh yeah, I remember the first time I read that, or that's a book that stays with me. I remember reading it the first time and thinking, he wants a load of blooming Turkish delight. What an idiot! That's disgusting. And then coming back to it later and going, oh yeah, that would. I'd be happy with that. So you've there's books that you've read 10, 20 times that you mentioned. Do you still read books from your childhood and get something out of them now?
Well, I had a very nice time rereading quite a lot of those books with my son, who's now 11. So over the years, we've done quite a lot of rereading. We just read Animal Farm, actually. I read aloud to him. He has always loved stories, but really struggled with reading. So I just completely, massively agree with what Luanne said, that it really doesn't matter for me. And again, I've worked with adults with literacy issues. It really doesn't matter what you read. It's just the act of reading itself is the thing that I think is so brilliant. And so if Matt reads, he can now read by himself, but he would still be inclined to read like a graphic novel or something with lots of space on the page, those treehouse books he likes, Diary of a Wimpy Kid. But together we read other things because he likes big, complex narratives. I think he just struggles with the chunk of the words on the page. So we just read Animal Farm, which was fun. But I read the Narnia books to him, read Harry Potter to him, read Hunger Games to him, which he liked. I've developed quite a skill. I'm really proud of this. I can sort of abridge as I go.
Yeah.
So both for length, again, just to make them a bit shorter so we get through them. Because I always want to get to the end, even if I've read the book millions of times before. I still kind of slightly like the narrative to close and move on to something else. But also for, there are a few bits in the Hunger Games, and actually a few bits in the Philip Pullman's most recent novel is quite adult in places. So again, I can look ahead, and obviously, he's 11. Anything that hints at sexual violence, for example, makes him very uncomfortable. So I can sort of slightly edit that out as we go. But again, I think it's a good way to learn. That's the problem, isn't it, with being a parent, I guess, or a teacher? You have these delightful, innocent children, and at some point they're going to learn that there's not very nice stuff in the world. And I think, again, learning that, through engaging with long-form narrative, that must be the best way to do it, I think. Yeah. So reading with him has really almost like reignited some of my passions, but I can't really get him into... I would continue to reread alone, like Anne of Green Gables and Little Women, because again, there's a bit too much romance in them for him, I think.
And of course, it's good practice for you, isn't it, Cathy, for your audiobook reading? It's just getting warmed up for that as well. So.
Well, funnily enough, I do really enjoy it. And then every so often he pokes me and says, like, you've started going very fast. And I realise, yeah, it's because I've stopped being professional about it. And I'm now just like thinking that, like, let's get on. We've got to get to breakfast, or we've got these jobs to do, or have you got your shoes on, or it's time to do teeth, all those boring things. But the reading together has been like so unbelievably special. And while I feel sad for him that pained him a lot when he couldn't read when he was younger. But actually, it has the fact that it has brought about this situation in which we read aloud together, I think, just does feel like a really special gift. So I love it. I mean, I would recommend it. I do come across people who read, read to their adult children or read to their partners, people who read to each other. Every time I come across partners who read to each other, I go home and say to my husband that I've met someone, they read War and Peace in bed, and I can see on his face, he's thinking, oh God, I hope she's not going to make me do that.
Well, yes, dear. Very nice. Very nice.
Very nice. Please don't make me read War and Peace in bed.
Aloud. Luanne, I want to talk about Homecoming. This is your latest novel, and as you said, it's been published at a strange old time, especially for a second novel, and you've not been able to sort of be at the literary festivals that you wanted to. But luckily, we get to do lovely virtual things like this for Harrogate. But it's a novel that spans 2 decades. It's about friendship and family and love. So can you tell us about Yvonne, Emma, Lewis, Kiama, and this story of discovery that you've written?
Okay. Well, the story opens with a young man, and he's 18. We meet him. He's in a coffee shop, and Kiama's a bit sort of lost and not really sure what he wants to do with himself. He spent time traveling around Europe and partying, drinking and doing drugs, and he meets up with this older woman called Yvonne. Yvonne was Kiama's university together, and they were friends for a long time. And Kiama asks her if she will go to Kenya with him because he wants to do this trip to find out more about his mum who passed. And that's the opening of the novel. And then the rest of the novel is sort of unfolding, going back over those 2 decades, discovering more about the two women, their friendship. And Kiama's kind of the child in between a lot of things, not just the women's friendship, but, well, I don't want to give it all away. But yeah, it's really a story about female friendship and how it's not as, there's a lot of representation of female friendship, that it's all lovely and I die for this woman. And, I have really close female friends, and sometimes we're like that, but sometimes we're like, I hate you. You're crazy. So I really wanted to do that honestly. And also how you feel out your friend when they have a child, because that changes a female friendship when someone has a baby and someone doesn't, and how you feel towards that child sometimes, how you could become that sort of the auntie, but then what happens when that child's not in your life. So yeah, that's what the story's about. That's the essence of it, really.
And it moves between London and Kenya, as I said, like over about 20 years. Did you go to Kenya, or were you writing about it from over here?
Well, I've been to Kenya, but it was quite a few years ago. And I went there on one of these programs because I've been teaching I was probably teaching for about 6 years when I went to Kenya, and I wanted to work in schools out there over the summer. And the experience wasn't quite what I thought it would be, but it had a big impact on me. And I've always thought about it and kept in touch with the people that I met out there. So I knew I wanted to write about it, but I just didn't know what. But then when I had the character of Kiama in my head, I knew what had happened to him, and I knew, he goes to Kenya. I just knew that was the story of him going to Kenya and having this trip with his mum's best friend and discovering all these different places and people that his mum would have met and known. And I just knew the story was set in those places that I had visited in Kenya all those years ago.
Cathy, coming back to your book and books as a comfort, which they very much are to so many people, and they have been for you, and seen you through some tough times. Thinking about what you said earlier and this sort of age of social media and doom and gloom in the news and stuff, how have you found the last sort of few months in terms of reading, and how it's helped this weird time and this sort of anxious, sort of depressing time that we're all facing at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really essential for me, and I have to do it. Basically, I have to turn off my devices, and I have to read, and that will keep me on the straight and narrow and mean that I can parent my child, that I can do my work, that I can be a good citizen. And I think we just need to have a real radical rethink about it, because I think a lot about my grandparents, for example, who really felt it was a civic duty to know the news, to be up to date. But I think so I think we still have that. People have this idea that you've got to be in the know. Whereas I think it's just not possible, I don't think, to be plugged into the news cycle. And not certainly if obviously some people can do it, but I can't cope with the constant tragedy. Because the thing is, there's always something awful happening somewhere. And that has always been true. There's never been a shortage of injustice and pain and strife in the world. And sometimes I think we forget that. It might feel like we are going backwards. I'm not disputing that we are, but we forget that when people say like we're living in unprecedentedly awful times, it's like, well, not necessarily. I could point you to several places in history where worse stuff was happening, but we didn't always see it. And I think it's that. I think we're not designed to bear witness in the way that we are now. And I think something about the way it weaves together. I find I dabble a bit in social media, but I have to dip in a toe, take the feeling of connection to the nice people that I like from it, and then I need to run sharp in the other direction, turning it off so the lure of those little dopamine inducing blue lights don't keep me locked in. And then I know I need to go and read something in a book, and that's my duty. And I think I've came to see that not only do I have to do, so at one point I felt I have to do this for my own sanity, so therefore it's just necessary. But I've also come to see that, we're just traffic. And I think that sadly, the bad people, they've become really good at using liberal outrage as a weapon. So I come to see now that if you do get involved, quite often you're just fueling the conflict in a way that other people know how to manipulate. So I just have to reverse out a bit and read some long form thing that will, make my mind grow. I think also optimism is really important. So obviously there's a human urge to bear witness, but I think it's really important that we keep an eye on how to remain optimistic, because again, we don't serve anyone if we basically, if we can't cope.
No, very true. And how has it been for you, Luanne, in terms of, reading? Obviously you've been working and balancing writing as well, but have you found time to sort of switch off and read and maybe put the news aside as well?
I think when the schools went back, that was really helpful for me. The schools being closed was just terrible. It was terrible for everyone with school-age children, and for teachers it was really devastating because they were telling us to do this online thing, and at the time my class were 5 and 6 years old, so it just can't do it. And I have my own 5-year-old here. So when we went back to school for those 5 or 6 weeks and I had like 7 kids in the class, I just felt lifted. And things were still quite terrible, but I was at school all day. I was walking 45 50 minutes there, walking back, so my day was really gone and I was busy. And I was like, why do I feel so much happier? Because it wasn't exactly great. There was so many restrictions at school and it was really weird having just that many kids in the class. But I think it's because I wasn't online all day, because I was definitely online so much more than I'd ever been. And, I do Instagram. I have a Twitter account. I check it once a week. But during that time at home in lockdown, and it's true, Cathy, you feel like, I need to know. It's my duty to know what's going to have that. Yeah. I need to know the numbers. I need to know what's happening in my area, in the country, in the world. And I just couldn't. Yeah. So being back at work, being at school, being busy, and staying off those. Yeah, Twitter really. It has to be Twitter for me. I can feel my mood, when I'm on it. Weird, isn't it? So powerful.
It's so weird. And I think because it's so weird, it's really easy to underestimate the danger of it. But what I've found over the last few years is exactly as you say, it is such a mood crasher for me. I have to be so careful. And I don't even understand how it happens. One minute I'm thinking like, it's so nice that this nice person read my book or enjoyed my event. Oh, that's so lovely. And the next minute, except it's not a minute, it's usually like an hour later and I'm slumped on the sofa still staring at it. I just feel like so awful, so depressed about humanity in general. And I don't quite know, I don't fully get it. So I think it's bad for us in ways that we're only beginning to touch at, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think we understand it yet. There's a couple of good books. I read a very good book called, I think it's called Digital Minimalism by someone called Cal Newport. And that helped me. You know, there's a couple of, that was good about, you know, beginning to understand a bit what the effect is. And for ages, I thought it was just my fault. You know, it was me being feeble and pathetic. Why can't I cope with this? Surely I have to be able to cope with this. There must be something wrong with me. And at the moment, I don't think it is. And when people tell me, as lots of people do, that they're struggling at the moment, if they ask for advice, what I try to do is peel them off social media and the news. And it is amazing. And get outside, that's the other thing. Like you said, you were walking. I found it really hard when we were on that one outing a day thing and not allowed to be with other people. So my husband would take our son for a walk, and then I just had to go out on my own, and I'm not very good at being on my own. So I sort of knew I needed to get out, but I really struggled with the being on my own bit. It made me feel really sad because I usually walk with them or walk with my mum, not allowed to see my mum, you know, all that stuff. Really hard. But I had to force myself out, because if I didn't get out into the air, then I would, you know, very quickly start feeling bad. So, I mean, I think so many people at the moment are struggling with mental health stuff. It's just so difficult, isn't it? It's just so hard.
Yeah, and it's hard to know what the right thing is, because I know certainly with the older children in school, you know, the impact of this on them, it's huge. It's huge. And what happens next as well. And, you know, some of the kids are like, I just want it to be over by my next birthday. And some of them say, well, no, this is it. This is how we live now. So, it's kind of scary, but children are so positive as well. I think they've rubbed off on me. You know, they get used to it. They don't mind now washing their hands 10 times a day or whatever it is. It's meant to be every 20 minutes. That's the official line. And we're all like, this is such a palaver. And the kids are just getting on with it. So it does rub off on you that, you know, they just get on with things and they find the joy in lots of other places.
Yeah. We do have great capacity to adapt, don't we? That's a good way to look at it. You know, the capacity we have to alter and change.
Before we find out what you've been reading recently and move on to the book off, a couple of more points on each of your books. Cathy, if I could talk about yours briefly. You mentioned you mentioned missing being a bookseller with rose-tinted glasses, and you know you wrote about your time at Hatchards in the book, which I loved, and some of the other roles you've had. I just wondered if you had an audience in mind when you were writing the book, or was it just something that you wanted to sort of put down and share and let it find its own audience?
Yeah, I didn't have an audience in mind. I think for me as a writer, I have to go through this stage. I call it the kill the reader stage. When I'm beginning to explore an idea, there's just such a gap for me between idea and finished published book. For every book, I've just had to think, I actually have to say to myself, don't worry, you never have to show this to anyone. It can be complete crap. I need to go through that stage where I don't consider that there is ever going to be a reader. And then there comes a point then when I flick, and then I really think about the reader. And I edit with the reader in mind, and I'm really rigorous. You know, does this serve the reader? Does the reader need to know this? Is this one too many self-indulgent anecdotes about this or whatever? So I sort of flip halfway through. The title as well, Dear Reader, that came in that process, because I was messing about with other titles and hadn't really found anything. It was my editor's idea, actually. She said, do you know, title-wise, I was just wondering, what about this? And I just thought, oh, yes, because it definitely comes from, then in the editing process, again, I want it to feel really intimate. I want it to feel very close. So I do a lot of reading aloud in the editing. So I read it all aloud. I imagine someone sitting next to me. I have my ideal reader sitting next to me in my imagination. I imagine them on the sofa next to me. Someone read the audio for my second book, A Manual for Heartache, and lots of people said to me, it felt like we were on the sofa together. And I thought, yes, that's, without quite knowing that that's what I was aiming for. That's what I was going with that book. And this time I sort of almost factored it into the editorial process. I want someone to feel like we're sitting on a sofa together. And not like I'm standing at a podium telling them what to think. Do you know what I mean? So it's that And I hope it, and again, I hope that works tonally. It's very definitely not books you must read. It's very definitely not, you know, I'm not saying I am the best, I know best, this is the definitive list. You know, it's sort of unashamedly idiosyncratic. I haven't bothered, you know, there's loads of genres of books that I don't read. I haven't tried to represent them. You know, I haven't crowbarred in a section on science fiction because I think I should, because it's just not massively my bag, you know. So it's just my take, and I hope it reads like someone has wandered in from a rainy street. They found me in the basement of a really nice bookshop, and we're just having a chat about books. That's kind of what I've aimed for.
Yeah, it's absolutely that. I actually found it to be a real comfort and like a hug. It was
Thank you.
It was like a hug, and you know, yeah, you don't sort of shove books down the reader's throat at all, but there were a few that as we were going through, some that I thought, oh God, I've never read that. I should really get on with reading that because Cathy says so. No. It's Dear Reader, of course, is the book that we're talking about there. And Luanne, you and I went to the same university, to Westminster University,
Yes.
albeit a couple of years apart. But and everyone will think that I was definitely the older one. But when I was reading the book, and there's a lot of sort of
of course, yeah.
I mean, you could have been describing my student house in Harrow, and I just wondered, is that bit of the book, the sort of 2001, 2002 bit, based on your time at uni? Not the
No, because our student house was very clean and very tidy. You know, like the government guidance at the moment for living in shared houses for students. It's like, make sure your shared areas are clean and don't share beds. Like, this is not going to work. But no, yeah, we were slobs at university. We were terrible. We were really bad. And it was girls, and it was terrible. It was just a horrible place. It was horrible. It was so dirty. But when I wrote that opening the bit that opens in 2001 of the university house, and I did send it to who I lived with back then, and I was like, is this okay if I put this in a book? And they were just like, no, you can't expose us. You can't expose how we lived. I ignored them.
You did it anyway.
Tough.
Good for you.
But students is typical. I don't know why are students mostly messy and dirty? I don't know why. They have all the time to clean.
Yeah, but you'd just rather sleep, wouldn't you? Clean.
Yeah.
Well, it felt, I mean, you know, in compliment to it, it felt very much like my time at uni. So it felt very real, is what. And it's Homecoming that we're talking about. That's Luan Goldie's book. Two beautiful covers here as well, I must say. They really stand out. So before we get to the book off, I'd just love to know what you've both been reading recently. I know that quite early on in the lockdown stage of this year, many people couldn't read. They just couldn't sort of have, or they didn't have the concentration to read. But I think more recently, and what we've been talking about, Cathy, just now, is that a lot of people are finding comfort in reading, and you know, either reading new novels or they're sort of going back and discovering things on their shelves that they should have read. So is there anything that you've read recently that stood out, that you've enjoyed, that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, I really loved a book. It's a two great big fat non-fictions, actually, I read in the summer. So I read Humankind by Rutger Bregman, and I just loved it. And it reminded me that when I'm not freaking myself out with social media, I really do believe that it is better to be optimistic about humans. I believe that it's better to run the risk of being screwed over every so often than to move through the world as a suspicious and cynical person. And this book really reminded me why I believe that. It's also if you want to understand why news functions the way it does, it's really good. And it's very scholarly, but equally extremely readable. And I felt so good that I turned my phone off and read that over a few days.
Oh, brilliant.
Yes.
I'm thinking he wrote a book called Utopia for...
He did, yes, which I've never read, actually. I haven't read that, but this is so good. And he talks about things, loads of things that we think we know about how people you know, the basic idea that if left to our own devices, we'll behave badly. He just challenges that and exposes how various of those myths came into being, like famous stories that we think we know about, you know, this science experiment did this, and then 5 minutes later, everybody was eating each other. And actually, it's not true. You know, there was a real life Lord of the Flies situation in which all the boys cooperated and were nice to each other, you know. So I just think that it's really interesting. And that, I say also for writers, as a little sidebar, it's really interesting. The Lord of the Flies stuff is really interesting because it does make you think about the power of fiction and how some, obviously I'm very pro-fiction in general, but there are ways in which, again, novels perpetrate unhelpful myths. And I think that's, and then I don't really think that novelists have a duty to not imagine badly, because again, that your duty as a storyteller is to tell a story. So I think it's probably more readers. We always have to remember that people are doing stuff because it suits the story. And of course, that doesn't just apply to fiction anymore, it also applies to news. People are doing things because it suits the story so that we'll consume more of it because we are just traffic. It's, you know, it's not a benign operation that has the intent to inform us and then cheer us up with a cat stuck up a tree story like it was when my grandparents were watching the news. So, and then the other book I'd really like to mention, because it was another great big fat book, is Black and British by David Olisoga. And it's just so good. And I felt so good that, again, rather than just staring at the news, that I was engaging in a really, it's just sort of so well written and taught me a lot of things I didn't know. And I just had a really good time reading it. And it just reminded me. And it's, again, quite a hopeful book. You know, he finishes with a line about how it's only really in understanding our history that we can try to make some kind of reckoning and then move into a future. So those are my two big, when people say also because when people say like, oh, I can't read and I can't write, especially if they say it on Twitter, I do also want to say, just get off Twitter. Of course you can't read. You know, why are you on Twitter complaining that you can't write a novel and you can't concentrate on books? It's because you're on Twitter. So that would be
Get
part
up.
of my description is turn your phone off as much as you can for a couple of weeks and read these two books and then see how you feel.
Yeah.
Right. And what about you, Luanne? You've got anything you've read recently that you like?
It took me a while, to get back into reading. So I sort of eased in with some short stories that I'd read before and loved. I love the Florida short stories, Lauren Goff.
Okay.
They're really good. So I read a few of those again. And then I read The Mothers, which is the Britt Bennett book. So I'd read The Vanishing Half. Everyone was raving about The Vanishing Half and I loved it. And then I realised, it's not actually her first novel. So I went back and read it and I was still thinking about it like a month on. And you know when you read a book that hits you like that and then you start another book and it's not quite, I'm waiting for something to take me away like The Mothers did. It's just, not even that much happens, but it's just beautiful. The way she writes, you're right there. You're right with this family in this house, just watching it all. Like, I just absolutely loved it. So yeah, I'm waiting on something else to knock me out like that book did.
Great. Yeah, Britt Bennett's fantastic. I love
so good.
And I do love a short story before bed as well. You know, there's something about just getting having a read of a short story just to get you ready for that nighttime thing. They're sort of aren't they, rather than like getting stuck in to a massive book. Right, it's time now for the book off. So this is where each of you gets 3 minutes to tell me and our lovely listeners and viewers about a book that you absolutely love, that you think we should all read, that we may know or we may not know. Before we find out what they are, before we put the time on the clock, we need to decide a couple of things. Who goes first and who goes second? So, Luanne, would you prefer to go first, or would you prefer to see what you're up against and go second?
Should I go first and get it out of the way?
First
you're making it like a big deal now. Now I feel nervous. The way you're building it up is making me feel stressed.
This is what I do. I lure you in as if it's just a really informal thing. And now it's getting serious. Luanne, you'll go first, no problem. Which means, Cathy, you get to decide which of these you'd like at the 3 minute mark. So would you rather be honked out or rung out by the school bell?
Well, of course, as a former barmaid, I've got to go for the bell.
Got to
Yeah.
Yeah, I love
Okay.
ringing a bell. I love ringing a bell. Time.
Yeah,
Can you
time
do
at the
your
bar.
talking as you do your walking? That's what you can say to us.
10 p.m, of course. So I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock for you, Luanne. As I said, you don't have to use them all.
Okay.
When you reach the 3 minutes, I'm going to be honking you out. Before we start the 3 minutes, just tell us the book that you're putting forward for the bit.
The Cutout Girl by Bart von S.
Fantastic. Which is a Costa Book Award winner, isn't it, I believe?
Yes. Yeah, it won the biography prize.
Fantastic. All right. 3 minutes on the clock for you then to tell us about that book. Over to you.
Okay. Right. So it is a biography, and usually I don't read that many biographies, but because it won this big prize and people were sort of talking about it, I thought, okay, I'll give it a go. It's not really a biography. It's kind of like a mixture of two things. So the writer, Bart von S, he grew up in Britain. He's a professor at Oxford, I think. And he's grown up knowing that his grandparents, who were Dutch and lived in Holland, that they looked after children who were fleeing the Nazis in Holland. So he's sort of grown up hearing those stories, knowing that was part of his family history, but never really finding out that much about it until he's older. And then he starts asking questions and digging. So that's kind of the biography side of it. But then there's this whole other half of the story, which is the story of a little girl called Lean. And this is in Nazi Germany. And she's a young Jewish girl. But as she says, she didn't know she was Jewish until the Nazis came. They were the ones who told her. And it's about her being taken from her family. Well, really, she has to say goodbye to her family so she can go in. And it's sort of like, it's her story. So even though it's real and this happened to her, the way it's written is like, it is fiction because it's not her telling the story. So it's even hard to explain. It's like two genres mashed into one, and it just pulls your heart out. And there are so many stories out there about World War II and these people's experiences and how it affected us all these years on. But this, the way it's done, makes it so urgent, so real. And it's all about family. And it's about, you know, this professor digging up all these family secrets and then how it changes his whole family story, that he finds out about Lean and how she fits in and how she was sort of written out of their story and then comes back in through him. And it's just amazing. So 2 years on, still thinking about it, still like, I want to know what happens next. I want to meet them. I want to talk more about this with them. And it's just amazing. You read it and it'll take you away, completely take you away. Is that 2 minutes? 3 minutes?
That is, you had a little bit of time to spare, but you didn't need it.
Oh, I
Great.
sort of thought I went over.
No, oh no. Oh, I won't let you go over. No. Very,
Never.
very brilliant. Well done. You can have a breather now. You can relax, and we'll come back and talk about that. That sounds absolutely fascinating. I haven't read it, but I do remember seeing it at the, hearing it talked about at the Costa Awards and thinking, gosh, that sounds really amazing. Thank you very much. So you sit tight, and I'm going to put 3 minutes back on the clock now for Cathy. And just before we start, Cathy, tell us the book that you're putting forward today.
It's Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively.
Another prize winner, won the Booker, didn't it?
Won the Booker Prize, yeah. I think in 1987 it says.
Yeah. Okay, over to you then. 3 minutes on the clock to tell us about Moon Tiger.
So I absolutely love this novel. It's very short. I like short, intense books. It opens with a famous historian called Claudia Hampton, and she's dying. And as she lies in hospital, she's drifting in and out of consciousness, and she decides to write a history of the world. From the mud to the stars, she says, no more messing about. And the way the novel is, I like the way the novel's constructed, because part of it's her memory, part of it's her present in the hospital as people come in. And then the narrative also switches. So we might get a scene from Claudia's perspective, but then we'll also get a little snippet from the person who's in the scene with her. And we meet the significant people in her life, her brother and her daughter. And as the novel goes on, and you meet this sort of charismatic lover she has, Jasper, the father of her child. He's a bit of a chancer, half Russian, does very well in the war, becomes sort of a man of note. But then as it goes on, you realise that really the heart of it is the love affair she had in wartime Cairo when she was a war correspondent, and she fell in love with a man called Tom. And she's not with him, obviously, later on in the book. It's so beautifully written. There are so many sort of heart-stopping moments, and I do really love books about the Second World War. I've never fully understand what my gravitational pull is towards it, but I think it's something to do with the fact that in times of conflict, when normal rules are suspended, people behave in quite an interesting way. Morals are a bit off the table, and I think probably the Second World War, because women were allowed to do interesting things a little bit more in the Second World War than they were in earlier conflicts. So I think that's why I love the Second World War so much. But it is just so thoroughly, beautifully written, and there's so much to think about history and storytelling, who gets to write the story, who owns the story, and what it means, and what heartbreak means, and how you do carry on. And I only realised I've been loving this book for years without fully understanding why, but I think it's because I aspire for myself and the people I know that we too, at the end of long lives, will be able to look back and see that the joy and the pain of life interweaves. And I think maybe that's what age and experience does. Not that you run away from the pain anymore, but that you see it as a part of life rather than an inconvenient, undesired bit of life. So that's what I've been thinking lately. And I do talk about this book the whole time, and I was going to choose something else. And then I thought, actually, no, because as soon as I thought about it, I just desperately wanted to reread it again for possibly the millionth time. So it was impossible to choose anything else, because I thought, no, I want to spend my time that I've got on Thursday night rereading Moon Tiger.
Fantastic. Well done. Brought it in pretty much on the wire there. Very good. Oh, lovely. Well done. Have a breather, Cathy. And thank you both. Two fabulous pictures and really interesting books as well. So, Luanne, let me come back to you. I just think it was so great hearing you talk about how, heart-wrenching it was, this book, the fact that it, you said it was urgent and real, and I got a real sense of that from talking about it. The way it's written, like fiction, reading like fiction, and that to me is a real, like, for me, a sign of great non-fiction writing, is that, those stories feel as if they've just been plucked out of the air and told.
Yeah. And it feels like a story you haven't, even though we have heard it before. When I was reading, I was like, I didn't know this happened. I didn't know this happened and that happened. And so to read something, because I've read a lot of books about World War II, set in World War II. So to read something and be like, oh, there's so much new information in here, it's just brilliant. My husband is Dutch as well, and we spend a lot of time usually in Holland. So it was really interesting to read about Holland in that time from the Dutch perspective, because I haven't really had that much. I guess I read a lot of British books from the British perspective. So yeah, it's just an amazing book, and a sad story, but it is sad, but it's wonderful as well.
Important story, and
it's important. Yeah,
you're still thinking about it 2 years later. That's a kind of a great book, isn't it? When it doesn't sort of let you go. I just think it sounds, really, really interesting. And Cathy, I do know Moon Tiger, and it's a wonderful book. I agree. I love a short book, and you're right, it's short and intense, and you sort of forget that it's short, really, because so much happens, and books like that are brilliant. The writing is beautiful, isn't it? I mean, you alluded to that, and I loved that little sum up there of sort of the joy and pain of life, and looking back on it and knowing that it all interweaved, and it was, that's a really, really lovely thought. And I would recommend, having read this one and not the other, I could recommend this to so many people as well. So thank you both for those wonderful pictures.
Can I possibly queer my own pitch by saying as well, though, that I love The Cutout Girl. And I loved what Luanne said about it. Maybe this is the power of books, isn't it? That what Luanne said. So I love the novel and the book, the memoir, and I've thought a lot about it again. And then hearing Luanne talk about it made me want to reread it again, because when someone else perspective. And can I also say, my husband's Dutch too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's a shame we can't convene afterwards for an hour's chit chat about the nature of having a Dutch husband.
We can pick this up another time and have that conversation. I mean, I'd be quite interested just to listen in, if that's all right.
Because, of course, back on that Second World War thing, I think it's really interesting because, of course, my son, as a product of both of us, is that line of the family that was occupied. They were occupied in the Second World War, and my late father-in-law was born in May 1945, at the end of the hunger winter. The Dutch people starved in that last winter war, and it's just a really different sort of feeling of lineage, I think. Sometimes I think about it a lot about Europe, the nature of the difference that's happening in the countries that were, whether or not countries were occupied or not. I think is such a divider.
Yeah,
definitely.
Well, I mean, I think people listening and watching here will want to get both of these books if they haven't read them already, and they'll certainly be interested in getting your own books. I've got to pick one to take home based on the pictures, because that's the game. And I think today, listeners may disagree, but I think today I'm going to go for The Cutout Girl by Bart Van Es. And the reason is not only because it was a great pitch, and I love the idea of you still thinking about it and being such an important story. It was also helped by the fact that Cathy loves it too. And I think Cathy will agree with me. It's possible that more people have probably read Moon Tiger. And so I think it's good to channel a relatively new and important book to find a new audience. Would that be fair?
I feel really happy with that result. Yeah. So even though I am the loser, I'm very, very, very happy. And I would like to immediately reread The Cutout Girl.
Yeah.
So well done, Luanne. Those books were The Cutout Girl by Bart Van Es and Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively, and we recommend you read those if you haven't already. And Homecoming by Luan Goldie is published by HQ Stories. Dear Reader is published by Picador. These two books are both available now, and I can't recommend them highly enough. Get them on your bookshelves now or on your e-readers. Luanne and Cathy, it's been so lovely spending some virtual time with you, and I hope that in not too long a time we can get together and discuss Dutch husbands in person.
We could have an anthology. We could do a Kickstarter and see if we can find anyone else. Essays must be about having a Dutch husband.
Yeah.
That's it.
There would be enough to write about.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you both so much for joining me. It's been so lovely.
Oh, thank
you.
Yeah.